Welcome to the Spunky Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, psychic medium Carrie Muggs. This is where we learn all things spirit, everything from spiritual gifts, awakenings, ghosts, aliens, and starseeds. Nothing is untouchable, but always fun and spunky. I am honored to be on this spiritual journey with you, so make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast of Spunky Spirit. I am Carrie Muggs, and this week we are going to talk about witches. So I've always been kind of, and this is such a general topic. Like, this could be anything as what kind of witches there are to the types of magic they do. But in honor of Halloween, we're going to kind of look at a little bit of how it maybe started, witches started, and where some of the stories come from. And I honestly want to kind of go into some of the witch trials, mostly the Scotland ones. I just feel pulled to that, and I know a lot of my clients do. So maybe another time I'll talk about the Salem ones. I want to go visit Salem and to that witchcraft, and I think that I will do it then. But right now we're going to talk about Scotland ones, which I totally plan on also visiting Scotland, because I really feel pulled to that, to the witches of Scotland. So I don't know if it's from a past life thing or what, but I just feel pulled to that. So that's what I'm going to do today out of kind of a special Halloween edition. But first of all, before we get into that, I'm going to talk about a little bit a while ago when I first started kind of, was kind of interested in, where witches came from or things like that. I listened to a podcast and I cannot find it now. So I don't know if she just stopped doing it, but it was a few years ago. And she told some stories about how some of the witches' origins began for Halloween. It was a Halloween special that she did, and I can't find it. So I don't know how true the stories are. I'm just going to tell you about the stories I heard from her, because I thought they were really cool and interesting, and how we can blow things out of proportion, or how the stories get told time and time again, and then they can get pulled out of proportion. And I kind of think right now witches are big because of Halloween and because of Hocus Pocus and all that stuff. But really, I kind of wanted to get down to a little bit of the magic of it and also a little bit of the history of it, because I really want, at the end of the day, this really teaches us about stereotypes, and it's really interesting. So first of all, when the witches kind of came from back in the old, like in the 1500s, 1600s, that people would have housemaids, and some of these housemaids would be like older women who never got married, or kind of older, and back then they would maybe be called hags. And I don't ever want to stereotype someone like that, because I feel like that's it's kind of rude. But the beautiful women, or the pretty so-called women, would get married off, and the ones that didn't would kind of get older, and they would become housemaids for people, they would be their maids. And in those days, witches, they were older hags, and they were witches, not witches, but the reason why they got the name witches or witch is because they worked lots with herbs and medicines and healing, and also too, they would use herbs for cleaning, because clear back then in the 15 and 1700s, they would use the smell of the herbs, like lavender and things like that, and they would put them around the house, and they would sweep the herbs with their brooms, and they would sweep it around so then that the house would smell good, or different things like that. And they would work with different herbs to help heal the children or the people of the house, the people that they were maids to. They would know all this stuff because obviously it would probably be well known between all the maids, and they would start doing that stuff. So that's kind of where the brooms started to come in, and the herbs started to come in. And one time, some of the, there was a sickness going around, or there was something going around, and people were hallucinating. And they figured out that some of the baked goods that the maids were making, like the breads and things like that, were getting a fungus or a mold on them. And people were eating the fungus or the mold, and it was making them have hallucinations, or So it's kind of like a hallucinogenic. And sometimes they would use it for healing, but also they would use it, the witches would use it just to like get high because that's because like what kind of life, they were just like using it to get high. So a lot of times that's where people would feel like it was, they didn't understand it was coming from maybe the mold of the bread or the baked goods, and so they would have these hallucinations and things like that. And the reason why the broom is part of the witches thing is because the maids would use these brooms to sweep up the herbs, but also these maids would there's a few of them, or one or two in particular, that would get a little bit high off the hallucinogens or the hallucinogenics. And you have to remember, these women aren't married. They have no, I'm just going to say it, they have no like intimacy, nothing like that. And so one of the people, one of the I don't know, the people that the maid lived with, the owners or whoever owned the house, came home and their maid was humping the broom or riding the broom, and that's kind of where it came from. And I thought that was hilarious because now we like think that brooms have to do with these scary things and like riding the broom and all that stuff. So it was kind of a funny joke, I guess, back then when witches would ride the broom. So it's just so innocent. It's so funny because a lot of people, like this lady who, the Hocus Pocus thing that's coming out, and she says not to watch it because the spells can come through your TV. Well, if that's the case, any kind of spells can come through your TV. News articles, any kind of news, movies, anything like that. They're trying to make you believe a certain way. So not just Hocus Pocus, but anyways, that's a whole nother story. But I thought it was kind of funny that it came or stigmatized from that. And so the witch hunts I'm going to kind of go to Scotland because that was the biggest witch hunt. We hear a lot about Salem and the ones in Europe, but the Scotland one was the biggest. 4,000 people were killed. Over 4,000 witches were killed in Scotland, and a lot of them were innocent. A lot of this was, witches were mostly the people who were accused of it were people who were the poor and people who, like midwives, because they really thought that a particular special time in a woman's life or vulnerable time was during childbirth. So midwives, if the baby was born, if something went wrong with the baby's birth, then the midwife was accused of being a witch. Also, it was so crazy because people would just get mad at people and they would accuse people of being witches. And the torturing was so bad with these people that they would just want to die, and they would say, yes, I'm a witch. And then they would throw other people under the bus too because the torturing was so bad. And I'm probably not going to get into a lot of the torturing, but it was horrible and horrific. And so they would just say, yeah, I'm a witch, because they wouldn't want to go through all the things, all the different tortures. They just would rather be like, okay, yeah, I'm a witch. So they would automatically just say, yeah, I'm it, because they just would rather be put to death. So, but from 1500 to 1700, the 1700s, lots of Scotland people, there was even people who wanted land. Like people, if you had land and your neighbor had land and you were privy to it, or if something happened to your neighbor and you were going to get the land, then people would be like, oh, she's a witch, and they would lose everything, and then you would receive that land. So people were just throwing people under the bus constantly, and even the people who would accuse people, if they accused more than 3 witches, and they were like, there was some sort of system where they would decide, some sort of political system where they would decide if the person was a witch or not. After lots of torturing, there was some torturing that would decide called, they would look all over your body to see if you had any kinds of scars, omens of the devil, and those would be like warts, scars, or even pimples, or any kind of moles, or anything on your body. And then sometimes they would strip them naked and pin and prick them with pins in different parts of their bodies. And if they bled, then they were not a witch. But if they didn't bleed, then they were a witch. And back then they thought that the witches were workers of Satan or workers of the devil, and so they were kind of scared of they were really scared of him. And so it was kind of like for a while just hysteria. People were just throwing people under the bus left and right. And there was one story of a guy who was in his 50s, this 50-year-old guy hit on this 20-year-old barmaid, and she didn't want to have anything to do with it. He was married and she didn't want to have anything to do with it. So then he went back to his wife and basically said, I can't function now sexually because this girl told me no, and I've lost all my manly duties. So his wife was claiming that this girl was a witch, and she got executed for being a witch just because she told this guy she didn't want to have, just because she didn't want to hook up with him. So it was nuts. And in fact, it was so nuts that now they do have it's called the Witches of Scotland. It's a campaign for legal pardons and historic justice for people, mostly women, who were convicted of witchcraft and executed in Scotland. And this was between 1563 and 1736. And it kind of just wants a pardon and apology for all those people those 4,000 people, over 4,000 people that were accused of being witches. Because honestly, a lot of them were healers or herbologists or healers like that, and they were fine. And then all of a sudden this craze came through and started this hysteria. And it started with King James in 1590. He had his princess or his bride come through, I think, and there was a big, huge storm, and she got lost in the storm, and so it stopped her from coming to sea. It stopped her from coming to him, so he had to go to her, and on the way, while he was sailing on the way to her, his boat also got in a storm, and so he had to stop in Denmark. And when he was in Denmark, he saw all of this witches craze, all of this stuff that was going on. So when he finally went back to Scotland, he kind of freaked out, and he thought that all of this had maybe followed him, and so he was kind of nervous about this. And so he kind of started having a hatred towards the dark arts. And he decreed that anyone suspected of being a witch must be in the league with the devil himself and must be put to death. So he kind of freaked him out because he thought the witches were after him. And so this kind of started the biggest witch hunt in North Berwick witch trials, where James VI, he returned to Scotland after collecting his bride from Denmark, and he also encountered terrible storms again, and he became so convinced that the storms were the work of the witches. And at that time, there was a small kind of village on the Scottish coast that had about 70 women that were accused of being witches, and so he cleaned house. And the thing about the witches in Scotland is the torturing was terrible, so I'm not saying they had a lot of mercy for them, but they did strangle the witches first before they burned them at the stake, because I would say they were more more empathetic, but honestly, it's all bad anyways. And honestly, the Scotland ones were worse because they were more Protestant. So Catholics were actually more in Europe were actually more nice to the witches. They believed in the herbs and the stuff like that, and they believed that so the Catholics weren't as aggressive, but the Protestants were very aggressive towards the witches. Now, one of the major things that they did is sleep deprive them, and that was really hard because, or they just keep telling him, you're a witch. And honestly, I think sometimes the women would just start to be believing that they were, and they would put him through all of these tests, and they would put them through like a sewage place, or they would put them in water to try and prove if they would tie their thumbs and their feet together, and they would be put in the water, and if they came back alive, when they came back up, if they were alive, then that means that they were a witch. So either way, it's like, it was crazy, and it's so crazy that so many people died. Because it was so. In fact, they made a called a Witches Act. It's called the Scottish Witchcraft Act, and so in 1563, it made it legal to totally torture these poor women, and so if you had a disgruntled man of the house or lady of the house that was mad at you or didn't like you, and they claimed you're a witch, this act made it totally legal for them to totally torture you and try and get answers from you in their own home. So we're going to talk about some of the most famous witches in Scotland after these messages, after we get back just a second. Okay, if you're going through an awakening and you're going through some spiritual stuff, I want you to go ahead and go to my website. If you're struggling with some of these things, some of the basic things of your awakening, things like the clairs, which clair do you use? Things like your chakras, your guides, your spirit guides, and how to connect them, how to protect yourself, what the signs and symbols that you see mean, what the dreams you see mean. If you're going through this, please go to my website at carrymuggs.com and go to the courses section, and you can download my awakening class. It's $60. It's an 8-week course. Every week you get a different theme. You get workbooks and worksheets to help you get through it. It's awesome if you need that extra help getting through your spiritual awakening. Also, if you want to be part of a group, you want to be part of what I'm doing behind the scenes, then you can join my Patreon, where each month we have a Coffee with Carrie where you can ask me any questions, and the topics are so cool. They're so awesome. And also, too, we are now doing spiritual circles online where we try and connect, and those are really, really cool. And you also have access to weekly readings. You also have access to monthly spiritual messages. And you also have access to a community of people, and we talk to each other on Discord, and it's awesome. So if you're interested in that, I will put that Patreon link in the show notes below. Also, I have a Shopify. If you want to go to your Shopify, go to my Shopify. Right now it has some sweatshirts, some meditations, and some other things, but watch it because it's going to start getting lots more things, lots more spunky spirit stuff. It's actually pretty cool. I really like it a lot, and it's going to be fun. So watch for that. The link to that is also below in the show notes. And if you want to be part of my newsletter, go to my website, carrymuggs.com, and you will get the monthly newsletter to let you know what's coming up and all the things to watch for. So there you go. Okay, so some of the famous witches in the Scotland era, one of them her name is Gillis Duncan. Now, Gillis Duncan is actually pretty cool. She is one of the most known ones because she, I guess, is on there's a show called Outlander, and my girls love it. I haven't watched it because there's one scene in season 1 that I wouldn't be able to handle, so I've kind of not been watching it. But Gillis Duncan is one of the most famous witches. She was a maid of a guy named David Seaton, and he was kind of cruel. He was kind of a jerk, and she would sneak out at night, and he would just automatically think that she was a witch because she wanted to go live her life, because these maids would be stuck in these little houses and helping the other families, and they wouldn't have a life. So she would sneak out, and he got mad, and he accused her of being a witch. So at first she refused to confess. She refused and denied it. And finally, there was just so much, she just couldn't handle it anymore. And finally she said, okay, I'm a witch, because I think she wanted to die. She just wanted to be done. And she started to throw other people under the bus, saying, they're a witch, they're a witch. And then she was held prisoner in the castle, in the king's castle, for about a year. And when she came out, or when they let her talk again, or when she wasn't let go, because they still got they still put her on the stake. They still strangled her, and then she died at the stake. But um, she said, I stand before God and I say I am not a witch, and all those that I have accused are innocent. So, she just said, yes, I'm a witch, because she wanted to die and not have to go through the torture. And then when they put her in I call it a dungeon, the castle, and she came out, she decided, okay, I'm going to stand up. And she did end up dying. They did end up killing her because of it. So, the North Berwick witches were the most, it was the first major witch hunt, and it began by a coven of East Lothian witches to sink James' ship. We talked about this too. And so that's where the first one came, and then there were other ones after that. And they would call them the Pintium witches, were in 1705, and there was a 16-year-old boy named Patrick Morton, and he was accused of a number of his neighbors for witchcraft, and no one was even questioned. No one questioned his story. One of the accused was arrested and left alone in the dark cell for 5 months. Another was starved in a dungeon. So this was a group of witches, and so this boy had this thing against them. Another was starved in a dungeon, and then Janet Cornfoot was caught by an angry mob, and she which was apparently included as the ancestors of Sean Connery, actually. And then they beat her and they dragged her to the seafront, tied her between the ship shore, and stoned her to death. So these were like bad deaths and this was because a 16-year-old boy, Patrick Morton, accused a number of his neighbors of witchcraft. He just didn't like them. So he just said, these people are witches. And no one even questioned it. They just said, okay. And all of these women they just were killed. And it's just crazy because they're all like this. And then there was a Major Thomas Ware. It's Weir, so I'm not sure, but in 1599, he was a soldier and an occultist with a reputation of being very, very religious. And he lived near a top called West Bow, and this is Edinburgh's Grassmarket, and there's Edinburgh's Castle too, where there's a witching well, a witch's well out there, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But this guy was known to be a saint, and in 1670 he was sick and he was on his sickbed, and he confessed to a secret life of sorcery and being a sorcerer. And so, along with his sister, he related incredible stories of meeting strangers and fiery chariots. I mean, this guy was probably just sick and having hallucinogens, or maybe he was on that mold stuff we were talking about, like who knows, right? And so he said he was given supernatural powers and intelligence, and they were both tried and found guilty of witchcraft. And his final words were, I have lived as a beast and I must die as a beast. So no one really knows, but that just fuels the fire for everybody, right? That just fuels the fire. We don't know if he just was getting sick and having hallucinations. We don't know any of that stuff. And so because of that, his poor sister got pulled into, and they were killed. And then the last was called the Paisley Witches. So the last mass execution for witchcraft it was in Western Europe too. So in Paisley is in 1697 in August. There was an 11-year-old Christian she was the daughter of a local landowner. She became violently ill, and with fits, and she said she was cursed by one of the family servants, and she was getting other strange symptoms. And so she was pulling balls of her hair. She was just pulling feathers from her mouth. Like, this was totally staged, right? Because she's pulling gravel out of her mouth, chicken feathers out of her mouth. So she's just making this up. She's an 11-year-old little girl. And in this, there were 35 men and women that were implicated, and 7 of them were found guilty. And they died because of this girl that said she accused all these people of being witches. So it was so attention seeking. And, a lot of it it's so crazy because now witches are huge. Like they make this hocus pocus thing and they're part of Halloween. And there is something magical about that, the way that they're implied now. But the thing about it is it's so cool because now people are starting to wake up. They're starting to wake up to this and they're starting to realize that really honestly, with it, whatever your intention is, witches are not bad. Some can have bad intentions, but honestly, most of them are just to help people heal. Most of them are herbologists. Most of them are just setting good intentions, creating spells to help people. And just like anything, there's always good and bad. There's always a balance. So I really feel like this also helps us realize too that we need to be really careful of stereotypes, right? Like we need to, when people accuse people of things, even political or government or city or even in our own communities, when people accuse people of something, we don't know the whole truth. We don't know all the things. And like just some of these stories to me are so crazy because all the people that were, most 90% of the people that were burned at the stake or accused of being witches were all innocent. They were all completely innocent, and it breaks your heart that these people, like mothers and fathers and all these people, were dying because people just were like scared or freaked out, or like something just kind of took over. And we see it even today. Some of these things happen and people get scared and don't understand. And it's just, 84% of all these people that were killed were women. And there's just so much, that's going on right now, like the stuff that's going on in Iran. It's all feminine. It's all, I'm not saying that it's always targeted towards women, but there's just so much that we still haven't learned and that history is trying to teach us. And even though it's kind of a fun Halloween thing and witches are kind of cool, it's fun to look at the history and where they come from. It also has like a deep, deep meaning, and let's not let history repeat itself. Let's not, jump on the wagon. Let's think for ourselves and just kind of, be gentle to others and nice to others and forget the stereotypes and forget what you're supposed to think and kind of do your own thinking. Think for yourself and ask the questions yourself, because these are just people and a king who started to freak out because they started believing things that weren't true. And this is what people were telling people left and right. And they were even like on the printing press putting pamphlets out about it and the news and all that stuff. And it's not, if you look at it, it's not that different today, is it? It's not that different today. We still have certain witch hunts. We still have certain things that we don't know the whole story on. So I guess this is a fun little Halloween thing, but it also makes you really dig deep and really think about the way history's going and how it really worked out. And it's kind of fun to look back. I will probably do another one about some of the magic, but I'm not really sure. Honestly, I don't really know because I don't feel like witches hold the key to all the magic. I think we all have magic with ourselves. I think we're all magical. I think we all have gifts. And just because some of us, I think just because we have powers or gifts or things that doesn't make us witches. It just makes us all unique. And I think that that's what, that we need to share that message. So I hope that was interesting to you guys. There was some of the stuff that I was like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. I didn't really want to get into the tortures because they were pretty bad. And that kind of hurt my heart a little bit. And I thought when I first started doing this, it would be kind of fun. Like I kind of liked the hallucinogen, the bread part and the riding the broom part. I thought that was interesting. And, but when I kind of started getting into some of the witch trials, it was disheartening and discerning. And it made me realize that, things, have they changed? Like, I think humans at one time can be mean. And I would hope to think that humanity has changed enough that we would never go down that road again. But then history repeats itself sometimes, and we've had other, not necessarily witch hunts, but we've had hunts after certain religions, and witches are a certain religion. And we've had hunts after Jewish people. We've had hunts after Christians and Catholics. And so just really take it into deep thought, I guess, and just think, where is this all coming from? And is some of the stuff that you hear about people, is it really true? Think about the witch hunts. So I love you guys so much, and we're going to do lots of fun different things for the month of Halloween. And I love you guys, and I will talk to you next week. If you liked this subscription of Spunky Spirit Podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode.